Yeah, those are big programs for sure.
It didn't help that my wife had me helping her with the yard sale till 7 o'clock last night,
Keeping you busy.
which is why I can barely move today because it messed up my back.
Oh, no.
Lugging all that crap outside.
To make lots of money. Or are you just getting ready?
No, we since yesterday we've had 3 people.
So not a lot of money yet, huh?
Yeah, which I kind of figured people will start looking for yard sales tomorrow. So
Where's Greg? Frankie, where's Greg?
What's that?
Where's Greg?
He's sick.
Oh no.
They go to ER.
Did he?
Yeah.
Oh no.
And he had a real high heart rate. Yes.
Yeah, when did he go?
He went a couple days ago, and then he had to go back last night because the symptoms reoccurred.
Mm.
Yeah, what time was it? Like 2 in the morning, 1 in the morning? Probably.
first thing.
He's Japanese. Yeah. Do it for
This just explaining seal files. My colleagues
turn it into less.
But you told me backspace.
Are you guys ready? Get started. Have you ever heard of Skills USA? I think you have. Most of you have. The new registration instructions just came out. So it's time for people to think about joining Skills if they want to. Champions at work here. When I first started teaching, you know, us technical teachers did not go to college to be teachers. You probably can laugh about that all you want. But the technical field tries to hire people that have technical experience. And so they want somebody that's been in the field for 5 or 10 years doing the job to teach people how to do the job. That's the whole idea. So when I first started, they take the new people to a place and try to do some training and teach us all about all the terms that have to do with teaching and all the teaching stuff. So I had to go to Warrensburg. I'd never heard of Warrensburg before, but it's in the middle of the state, small town, really nice, it's fine. Well, when I was at this training, there was a point where I was with a bunch of OTC people. I didn't work for OTC, but I was with a bunch of OTC people. We went to Walmart and a tornado came. So we had to hide out in Walmart and at Warrensburg. In the next session we saw after that, I don't know why that has an impact, but it does on your brain and on your thinking. The next session we saw was about Skills USA. So some of the teachers from OTC were saying, I'm not going to do that. What a load. We have to teach these people stuff. We don't have time for all of this extracurricular things. And I sort of was on the fence. It's like, I can see that. You know, I've got a lot to teach people, a lot for them to learn. You guys know that I take it really seriously that you get information about all the content that you're supposed to get. I'm not one of those teachers that's going to skip 3 chapters because Joe was having a hard time keeping up with us. Joe is going to be left behind. This is college. We're not no child left behind. We're like, take this class again, Joe. So you know that it's important to me to get you all that information, and it was when I first started teaching. So I thought, this is a hard thing. Is it really going to be worth all the time and effort? I can tell you now, yes, it is. And for you as a student, it is worth all the time and effort. If you have to take off work to do Skills, is it worth it? Yeah. If you have to take off work and your boss won't let you, will I write them a letter and explain how wrong they are? Yeah. Have I had to do it before? Yeah, a few times. So it is important. These bosses sometimes don't realize that we're talking about giving you better skills to work for them. So they have to be kind of reminded of that sometimes, which is never a problem. So what is Skills? You guys have heard about it? It's the National Student Organization. It was founded in the 60s, and it was actually started by a donation from FFA. You ever heard of FFA? Future Farmers of America. They were a huge organization and a really big student organization by that time, because our country is kind of agriculturally oriented. So FFA was a huge student organization. Those students had an opportunity to go compete against other students in their areas, showcase their skills, learn more things, learn leadership skills. And they thought, you know, our students that are in other programs, carpentry, machining, nursing, computers didn't really exist then, electronics, all those things. These students don't have a student organization to use to get these kind of opportunities. So they donated money to start Skills USA, which was actually called VICA back then. So when it first began, it was just a few people across the country, and they decided that they would try to have skills-based contests so that students could showcase what they've learned and see how they compared or stacked up to other students in the same area. Well, now we've had about 8.5 million people go through Skills USA over the years. It's endorsed by the Department of Education. It's actually something that both of our current president and previous president both endorsed wholeheartedly, so we could actually have some agreement there. We also have what's that guy's name? Mike Rowe, who's the Dirty Jobs guy. He comes to Skills Nationals every year, has for the last 3 or 4 years, and he's a huge supporter. So he's been a great boon at getting the name out there, because our country as whole is short workers, right? We are low on skilled workers. We don't have enough plumbers. We don't have enough welders. We don't have enough construction engineers. We need those people. We need computer programming people. So that's why Mike Rowe is so bought into it, because that's what Skills does, is try to create workers that are ready to go to work, not, as you know, those philosophical people like my daughter who have film degrees and aren't really ready to go to work. We want people working. So our mission is to help members become world-class workers and responsible American citizens. So these pictures are at Nationals, and Nationals is in the summer in Louisville, Kentucky for the next couple of years. It is really big. It's hard to explain how big it is to somebody who hasn't been there. We have over 16,000 instructors, administrators, students that go to Nationals, between competitors, judges that come from all around the world, and teachers that are there to support and everything else. We have about 15,000 schools now, 54 state and territories. So Indian nations, Guam, Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, all of those different territories are considered states. So that we have a lot more than actually 50 states. Over, I want to say 375,000 members in the last couple of years. So the way it works out, people join Skills for the opportunity to learn about professionalism and to become better at their skill. Usually we have about 350 to 400,000 people that join Skills. The first set of contests are called district contests. Our district contests would actually have been held the last couple of years at my old classroom in Carthage. So you would get a chance to see how awesome it is if you go down there and do programming or web dev. But at districts, they come up with different numbers, but I want to say it comes out to between around 40% of the students that are members participate in district contests. Now, when you go to districts, you have to get first, second, or third to move on to state. I'm going to bring this one up. So first, second, or third, actually first and second to go on to state. So then at state, we're dropped down. We end up with maybe like 20-25% of the members that qualify for state competition. And at state, you have to win first place to go to Nationals. That's the only way. So when you get to Nationals, you're one of 10% of the total 375 to 400,000 students that started out in Skills. So you're already the top 10 just by getting there, right? And then when you compete at that national contest, you get an opportunity to place within the nation. And man, what a great thing to put on your resume. So here's kind of the dates. District is in February. State is at the end of March or the beginning of April. For the state competition, it's 2 days. You have to have those 2 days to be able to go. It is a time investment. For the national contest in Louisville, it's the entire week. It can be hard on people. So OTC covers everything except your food and personal items, because they know that it can be rough. So if you're having to take 5 days off work in the summer and pay for your own food, they don't want you to have to pay for your lodging and equipment. Now, students that come from Hawaii, usually there's about 10 students every year from the Hawaii group. They spend the whole school year fundraising. So each of those students that comes from Hawaii spends $2,000 to $3,000 to be able to come to nationals. So it's a really big deal, and they think that it's really important, and they're right. Why? Because besides teaching you teamwork and leadership, giving you an opportunity to meet people from all across the country, it really does reinforce your employability skills. You have to explain things to strangers. You have to talk to people about things. Gives you better skills. The national contest is really unparalleled. FFA now tries to get contests set up as well as skills does, because we're just really awesome at it. Besides doing that, we have a lot of community service activities. Here at OTC, I think they have some food drives and things like that to be a local community organization. About $1 million in scholarships from skills every year. It also helps students meet potential employers, and winners of different contests receive different prizes and scholarship money. So here at OTC, if you qualify for nationals, you for sure are getting a scholarship from OTC if you want to keep going. The state level, you have to check because things kind of change. Some years they have money available, some years they don't. But as far as meeting potential employers, Tim Franklin, if you've met Tim, you know, Tim here in town is kind of, he works really hard at all of those meetups. So he's in charge, you know, that .NET meetup. He works a lot with the web dev meetup and all the different meetup groups. He helps everybody. So that's kind of his thing. Tim's also a former student of mine from Carthage, and he helps every year judge the computer programming or web design contest at the district level. He'll start out with programming, but we have a hard time finding web judges, so sometimes he'll jump over and be the judge for our web design contest too. So if you meet Tim at the contest, you've already got a leg up over meeting him here at school, where there's a bunch of people that are all kind of, oh, I'd love to meet you. He knows everybody in town. He knows all the employers. Dustin Blankenship is another person that helps us every year with district contests. He works for a company that does contracts for the federal government, websites, web designs, and they're always looking for people and they're always hiring. And the great thing about that company is they offer a lot of remote work. They let people work from home. So that's a pretty big deal. Those two are just at districts. That's not even if you move on past districts. Now at nationals, oh, let's see, nationals. I had one student once. Remember, I used to teach high school. So I would have people as sophomores, as juniors, and as seniors, and I would be able to keep those people kind of for a long time. So one student that I had for all 3 years is a great web developer. He works for Squared now, the credit card processing people in Southern California. And he was just bound and determined to make it to nationals with his web development. Now it's a 2-person team, so we'd always have to take someone else with him. So we'd always find somebody that, you know, wouldn't bother him too much, kind of like do the graphic stuff that he threw their way or whatever, those kinds of things. But Brandon would mostly take care of it. Well, after his junior year, he got a little discouraged. And he told me, he said, you know, I don't know if I want to do skills again next year. That Missouri lady is mean. She's real mean. She doesn't like people from Southern Missouri. And so he felt like he was being discriminated against, which he was in a way, because that lady is tough. So he was thinking he wasn't going to do it anymore. I said, I understand. You know, she's going to be hard for us to get by. The only way you're going to get first in that contest is if your website is so far and above everybody else's that she can't even get by with saying that it's not. We knew that. So he was thinking about just not going. Well, he had this website developer out in the cloud somewhere that was like his idol. I don't know if you guys have people like that, but I've seen, it's just a guy who was pretty instrumental in web design standards and how things work. And he had just kind of followed this person over the years. He was on a lot of forums and different things. And so Brandon really looked up to this person. But he was a great role model, not a mentor because they didn't know each other, but more of just a role model, somebody that he wanted to emulate and try to be successful in his life. So he was looking around at some historical information about this guy, and he happened upon the guy's resume. And on the guy's resume, he actually said that he was a Skills USA competitor at Nationals when he was in high school. So Brandon was, that's it, I'm going again, I'm gonna do it. And he did. And he took first at state, and he went on to Nationals, and he didn't win a medal at Nationals, don't win anything, but he did it. And so as far as he was concerned, he was a super winner because he had tried really hard to get to that point, and he made it. He had a great time at Nationals. The guy that he took with him had a great time too, so it all worked out and they had fun. Plus, he's really successful now. Oh, I have so many Skills USA stories that could drive you crazy. But it's a little bit different at the college level. For us, you guys have job responsibilities and work responsibilities that you have to worry about. So you have to really be sure that it's something that you can fit in. I know that. But I do think that it's definitely worth your trouble. Let's see. Okay, so why? It is fun. You could meet new people in your field, meet new people outside of your field, which is pretty fun too. You can see how you stack up against your peers at other schools. Dr. Ford likes to say, if you guys have heard her talking at any sort of meetings or conferences or anything, I think she says that Chase's medal this summer is the 7th in a row for OTC for computer programming at Nationals. So she takes it pretty seriously. It's a pretty big deal, and we'd like to keep those medals coming. So that's the computer programming contest. It is nice to get to Nationals and beat everybody else. Really nice. We like it when you guys do that too, because it's good for everybody here, not just the person who goes, right? Makes OTC look better for all of you on your resume. So that's computer programming. The other contests that you guys could take a look at if you were interested, the web design contest, the 2-person team. You usually want to have a coder and a graphic type person so that you can split the work up that way, but you could do it however you wanted. The video game programming contest is a 2-person team. We've been taking people to that one for a couple of years. We can get 4th, but we're having a hard time getting up there to get 3rd to get that medal, so we'd really like to be able to do that. Technical computer apps is another contest that people might be interested in. Technical computer apps is more operating system and office configuration, so that's kind of more for people who are taking CIS and networking classes because it's kind of networking related. There's also some leadership contests. So some people decide that they don't want to do programming or web design. It's so stressful. There's also job interview, customer service. Customer service is where you're kind of on a help desk and you're answering calls. The job interview contest, you're actually getting scored from the minute you walk in. The person that you check in with that's acting as the receptionist is actually giving you a score, making sure you got there on time and we're nice and professional and all those kinds of things. So there's lots and lots of other contests that you can take a look at if you're interested. So how do you sign up if you're interested and if you want to? First, you have to look through the different contests and decide which one you would be interested in doing. You could be interested in more than one, but Dr. Ford wants to know what your primary interest is. The dues is $25. There is a receipt on Canvas that you can print to take with you to pay, and then you bring that receipt back to get all official Skills USA aid. Then there is a sign-up form that Dr. Ford has on Google. So the big thing about this is college is different than high school, but it doesn't matter. No matter which one you're in, you want to stand out, right? Because all these people that you're friends with are also your competition. And when you're trying to get jobs and things like that, you want things that are going to make you stand out from the crowd. And doing a contest in Skills USA is one of those things. The last time Tim came and spoke to one of my classes for me, I hadn't asked him this semester, I apologize. But the last time he came and spoke, he looked at everybody and he said, join Skills USA. He didn't join Skills USA when he was in high school. That's why he tells you guys to do it now. He's like, I missed out on that chance. Just join Skills USA. Why? He said, if I interview you, I'm going to ask you what you did that was different than what everybody else did. And Skills USA is one of those things. So it's just right there. Questions? If you go to Canvas, there should be an announcement, or if not now, there will be in a moment. Let me add it.
What do you have to pay?
By November 15th. So that's our deadline.
At least the fee covers the entire year, not just like part of it.
Right. It is your whole year, but most everything happens in spring. Okay, so on the announcements, the Skills USA info, sorry, it's another link. It's really clicky, but that page should give you all of the information. So here's Skills USA's website, if you want to look at their website and get a little bit more background. Here's the Google Docs sign-up form for Dr. Ford, and here's the dues form. Doesn't matter which order you do these two things in, just so you do both of these things to get it all done. Now, again, laptops are something that can be supplied for you from OTC if you don't feel like you wanted to use yours. Yours might be better, but if you wanted to, you could get one from them. So the signups are going to end November 15th. If we have more students than we can have in a certain area, Tiffany will set up a district competition, or a local competition, I should say, to decide who's going to go to districts. We've had to do that a couple of times, but it's not been a super big deal. If you have any more questions, you can talk to Dr. Ford or me or Kirsten or anybody about what they've seen and what they've thought about it. Contest descriptions are at this bottom link. And so I think that's giving you all of the stuff that you need. One other former student I have that went to nationals that I got to tell you about, Austin. He is a real artsy kind of guy. He's a great coder too, but he is out in Southern California also, and he works for Ryzen Studios that does 3D graphics for some of the gaming industry. And Austin actually went for 3D animation. And when we got there, one of the people that was judging the 3D animation contest was one of his mentors or people that he looked up to that worked at Unity. And he was the guy that did a lot of the tutorial videos for Unity. So Austin was really, really excited to get to meet him. And he actually came from the United Kingdom over to judge this contest at Skills USA. So it really is kind of a big deal. So super fun. Let's do database stuff. So while we're here at Canvas though, let's go look at our modules. We're going to need this setup SQL Server access here in a few minutes. We don't need it right now, but I'm just going to go ahead and open it and minimize this out of my way because we're going to need that here in a little bit. For right now, though, we want to get our project done that was reading our access database. Was everybody here last time? Do we need anybody that needs code? Oh, I'll let them. So you guys open the chat and sent him, somebody sent him that member.cs file for that class information so he can pop that in there. I think that's as far as we got.
We also did the table as well.
Yeah, we'll make him set up his own database. How's that?
it's not that I can't get it figured out, I just don't remember how you set a member database.
Yeah, and we want him to know how to do it anyway. So.
It's in the book, so it's not that big.
It doesn't tell you how to create it, no. That's not a thing that they show you.
It has the data inside.
Yep, what you got? So ours was DB Access Member App 102. Now, I had a student in my 101 class earlier say that over in the electronic media department this morning, all of their computers just hung and froze and locked up and did all sorts of terrible things. So save often. We had a few people lose some work in that 101 class right next door around lunchtime when the network sort of went on them. Had one person in here this morning that was having trouble. So hopefully we're going to fix all that. So last time we created this application and we created our member.cs, our class file. So this, if you remember, our class reflects exactly what we put in our table, the database table that we created in Access. So they're matching. Before we do anything else, let's rename some stuff. I want to rename our form. Let's make it form member. And then our program.cs. I want to rename it. And let's make it member app.cs. Okay. How are you, Colton? Gotcha. Thank you, guys. It's all fixed. Okay, so I'm going to just try to bring up this form because we hadn't even started designing our form yet. So all this form is going to have is a list box in the middle that's going to show that data from our database, our members. So I think that for our form, let's change the text property to say access members so that we know that we're looking at our access database if we're looking at this form. I'm going to set my back color to some sort of weird color too so that I can flip back and forth between them if necessary. So let's see, I'll do this awful pinkish color. And then I'm going to change my fore color. And my font, I'm going to set to 12 and Arial. Doesn't look as blinding to you. It is to me. Pretty blinding.
It is pretty blinding.
Pretty blinding. Okay, so I want to label at the top. That's going to be a heading. So this label is going to say members. And let's make it kind of a big font. So I want it to be about 24. So underneath that, let's put a list box. And let's name our list box LST BX members. And that should be the only property that we need to change for our list box. We'll put a button on here to load the data. So let's name that BTN load. And I'm going to make the text property say load data. Someone's stuffing right on us here. One more thing down at the bottom. I'm going to put a label, and we'll use this label for any messages to give our user. So let's name it LBL message. Because it's going to be showing up when we first start, I'm going to change this text property to say, welcome. Okay, I'm going to save. I'm ready to start looking at some code. Before we do, though, I want to bring up a Google tab, and I want to search for ADO.net. ADO.net is the library that we're going to use that gives us access to all these different database management systems. If I look at the blurb on Microsoft's website about ADO.net, they say ADO.net provides consistent access to data sources like SQL Server and XML. So these ADO libraries are what give us the ability to connect to all these different database management systems and run SQL commands without us having to change our code a whole bunch. So if I'm Oracle, as an Oracle person, I'm going to be responsible for creating the ADO.net library that works with Oracle. I'm going to give that to Microsoft. They're going to test it, make sure everything's good with it, and publish it as part of their ADO.net library. So free SQL, whoever's database management system you're using, the actual original vendor is going to be the one who wrote the code that went to Microsoft to create these ADO.net libraries. So this ADO.net architecture is what allows us to use things consistently. When we're working with ADO.net, we have two main components that are important to us. Those are data providers, and the data provider is our database management system, so Access or SQL Server or Oracle, and then the data set. And the data set object is just going to be the collection of all of the resulting rows that were returned from our query. So that's how we're going to be able to handle this. So when we're working with ADO.net, we have to put in the right using statement for the database management system that we want to use. So let's go start. I'm going to double click on our load data button to bring up our code. So for this application, we're going to be working with our Access database. So all of these ADO.net libraries are in the system.data namespace. But for Access, we're going to use the OLE DB providers. So this is the data access library for Microsoft Access. And it's really hard, so as I'm talking up here, I'll say Access for Access, and I'll say Access like 75 times. And then we'll switch to SQL Server, and I'll say run your SQL on SQL Server, and so there's a lot of redundant words. It's the way it is. So our OLEDB library is going to give us all of those resources that we need to be able to create an application that uses an Access database. We're going to create some class level objects. So these objects are going to help us work with the database. Now first we want a private OLEDB connection, and we're going to name that DBCONN. Have these flow charts for you. If you want them or not, but this is a visual of how we're going to make all of these connections happen. Okay, if you look at that flow chart, at the very top is our database. That's what we're trying to get to. Before we can get to our database, as you see right under the database, we have to have a connection object. So the connection object forms the link to our actual physical database. So on your flow chart, in the little lines there beside that connection object, you probably want to write down that our connection object is dbcon. That's what we named it. You might also want to know that it was an OLE DB connection type of connection object. So an access connection. So that creates, or will create as we work with it, the connection to our database. Whenever we were working with flat files last semester, we saw that to process a text file, we had to open it, then we could read it, and we would keep reading and reading and reading until we got to the end, and then we had to close the file. If we didn't close it, we get inconsistent results, right? If we try to read that file again, it might be empty, it might not have our stuff, so we always have to make sure we close it properly. When we're working with the database, we have a connection, and our connection to the database has to be opened. Then we will use it to read data over and over and over until we get done reading it all, and then we have to close that connection. So our dbcon object requires some work. We're going to have to open it, tell it how to connect to the database, and we're going to have to close it. If we don't close it properly, we'll have all sorts of resources tied up in our database that don't need to be, and we'll start having problems with performance. Okay, so we got our connection object created. Next, we need an OLE-DB command object. Now this command object we're going to call dbcmd. It's going to be responsible for the SQL command, the select statement that we want to run on our database. So again, in your flow chart, you want to note that we named it dbcmd, and it's using OLE-DB command. The third part that we're going to use for this application is a DB reader. So I want an OLE-DB reader. And this is going to be, where is it? OLE, oh, data reader, not DB, that would be too consistent. So we want this thing to be an OLE-DB data reader, and we're going to name it DB reader. So if you can look at the flowchart and see, the connection connects to the database. The command connects to the connection. The reader connects to the command. And we gotta get all these pieces lined up together to where we can get our data out of that database properly in the way that we want to. Now, some of these things need some additional information. So we'll create a few more variables here. We're going to create a variable that's going to be our member class, and we'll call it a member. Because as we read things out of the database, we are going to want to use that class library to make sure that we know how to access them. Then we need another variable that's a string, and this is going to be called sConnection. And it's going to be our connection string. I need to put some comments here. dbcon is our connection object. DB command is our command object. DB reader is our reader object. A member is going to be one of our members. Now, S connection is going to be our connection string. So the S connection is going to be used by our dbcon object. So if you want to note that in your flowchart, that's going to be relevant, that that connection string is going to be used by our connection object. Lastly, one more string, and that's going to be our SQL command. So it's going to be used by our command object. You got them? So we have a lot of overhead in getting to the database, don't we? You can tell already, because we've got all of these objects and things that we've never had to worry about before. Now they'll get to be like old hat when you work with the database all the time. And remember, what good is a programmer that doesn't know how to get to a database? Oh my goodness. Getting it? Okay. So let's see if we can connect. We're going to put this code in our button load click event. Notice this. Do you see those 3 dots under your BT of your name? Yes, it violates rules. So.
But that's kind of ironic because that's what I started with.
I know, so our textbook is violating the rules. They kind of changed the rules, but should be all uppercase. So some of those warnings we're just going to ignore. So to start out, we need a connection string. I'm going to set our connection string variable so that it holds our connection string. And our connection string is going to vary based on the database management system we're using. So if you go out and you find Fred's SQL, and Fred has an awesome ADO.NET library already built, you're going to have to find some information on Fred's website of how you formulate the connection string for that particular database. So it doesn't matter how much experience people have in working with databases, unless they use that particular database all the time, they're going to have to go do some research to figure out how to format the connection string. For access, our requirements are that we have to start out with this keyword provider. Now our provider for access has a really long name, and it's not that. It is Microsoft.ace, all in uppercase, .oledb, online linking and embedding, which is Microsoft standard, .12.0. Now, after the 0, within our double quotes, we want a semicolon, because that's the end of that connection parameter, the provider parameter. If you go home and you're trying to run this application and you get an error that says that this is not installed, this provider is not installed, look at your textbook first, because your textbook actually has a little blurb on what to install if you get that error message. If you start Googling it, you can end up taking kind of a long road to get to the spot the textbook takes you to directly. So just remember, a few people will have trouble and a few won't, and it just has to do with what kind of Office products have been installed on your PC and stuff like that. So it's a pretty easy install if you do have the trouble. Just remember to look at your textbook because it's so much faster. Okay, so after that provider string, we need to add more. We want a data source parameter. And the data source is going to be the name of our database. So I'm going to go find that. Yep, now I'm going to make sure that it is. So no, that's the name of our table. Our database is the actual access file that we created. So we want to find it, make sure we know exactly what our name is. So I put mine in my 151 folder. And I had created this FA18 SQL setup folder for it. No, I didn't. I did something. Let me find it. Is that what yours is? Is that what I put? Oh, I wonder where I put it. I had to go searching this morning. You think it's this? Oh, it's that one. He's on it. Look, even the right date, 10/15. So chapter 14 member table. I don't care too much about that folder though. What I'm concerned about is what I named this file. So my file is named memberdb.accdb. Remember, I can see that .accdb because I have my view options set to show file name extensions. And of course I have it set to show hidden items because as a programmer, I want to see all those things. So memberdb.accdb with the uppercase M and DB. All right. So that's going to be my data source. memberdb.accdb. I don't need to close that one with a semicolon inside the double quotes, but I do need to end my C# line of code. So when we're looking at our project here, and we know that that's going to be our access file name, we saw when we were working with XML that sometimes we have to really worry about our source code to get TFS to copy it, right? We want TFS to make sure all of those things get copied so that I can see them when I grade, or else you guys have to manually upload them to Canvas. So we were thinking, Greg especially had suggested it, what if we, instead of putting our database just right here in our project folder, we know TFS won't check it in if we put it there. We know if we put it in our bin debug, TFS won't check it in because it knows it's object code. So what if we create a new folder within our project and put our database in that? Let's try it. Plus, it's much more organized. So I like it. So let's go to our project. So at the project level, not your solution. At the project level, right-click and let's add a new folder. And let's just name this folder data. And that's a real common name for folders that contain databases. And then I'm going to grab my ACC or my member database and just copy it into that data folder. I like that so much better than it hiding somewhere. Now that means I need to update my data source a little bit. So I'm going to say that it's in the data folder of our current folder, current project. So when we were looking at doing this morning, we thought, man, that's going to be something we're going to have to search for online to find out how we mention our project folder. But we didn't have to do a thing. This just worked. So Visual Studio is by default saying, well, you must be starting at your project folder. So I'm going to look for a folder named data and then find this file within. I've got the 2 backslashes because the first one is the escape character. And the second one is the actual backslash that'll show up as part of my file name. So it takes us a while to build this connection string. This is a thing that programmers will keep like on their desktop in a little notepad file, their connection string. It's the kind of thing that you keep around to make sure you can just pop it into your code real easy. Yes, sir? Do what? Oh, I didn't try. That's up to you guys. Did you check it in? Did you actually add it? Because I think you can right click on it and say you want to add that one file to source control. So even if it doesn't let us do it to TFS, you can upload the database to Canvas when you check in your assignment. I still like it being in the folder, I think better. That's better, more organization. It's easier. Yeah, I think it's just a better way for us to be doing things, even if TFS fights back. Okay, so we've got our connection string built. You know, sometimes you're like, this is just crazy. In the real world, they don't spend that much time. No, I've seen programmers spend 2 or 3 days trying to get a connection string just right with a new data provider, working with something they haven't worked with before. So it's just one of those things that we have to deal with sometimes. All right, so that's our connection. So now let's say we want to instantiate that OLE DB connection, and we would like for it to use this connection string. So we're going to instantiate that instance of our database connection using that connection string. Then using our connection, we want to open the connection to the database. Now at this point I want to test. So that's why I only have these 3 lines of code in here so that we can test and make sure that we can get to your Access database and we're not having any sort of problems. So I'm going to start this. And I don't really have much going on if I click load data, but if it's not working, it's going to give me a runtime error, so I'm going to know. So if it does nothing, good sign, it connected okay to the database. It didn't do anything because we didn't tell it to. But yeah, you can see something's going on, huh? You can tell. It's definitely doing a lot of connections, using a lot of memory. Perfect. So is everybody's working okay? No issues?
I got an issue, but I'm on my laptop, so I gotta go through the textbook and do that thing you're talking about.
The database? Can't you copy it?
Providers.
Oh.
I gotta do. I'm using my laptop.
You are? Okay. So keep putting the code in.
Yeah.
And actually, you might grab that. I don't think it's too big of an install. You might be able to do it. Check that error that we are in 14. Okay, so you got it on both.
I know exactly where it's going.
No, somewhere buried in there. It should be really close to where the arbiters were. You're gonna have to find it too. Let's see, I'll find it.
I'm just trying to pull that one.
That's all right.
I kind of got caught up in yesterday, so I don't have the database set, and I can't follow this along, so I'm just taking notes of what you're doing.
Page 930. Oh, wait, that just says there was a previous note in this chapter. Another error. 915. So let's see if it'll work. It's page 915, you guys. And it says, let me see if this website is still valid. So they say to go to www.connectionstring.com. Oh, website for connection strings. Oh, connection strings.com /
That's probably a pretty big error just for you to actually get that or actually make a website for it.
yeah, the Microsoft ACE-OLEDB-12-0-provider. You can just let me do this and we'll see if it is not registered on local machine.
That's too big of a URL. I think you may have a space.
Yeah, this is registered. I got to it.
Did you get to it?
Yeah. There's a bunch
Does it go to the right place? Yeah, it actually is this 2010 redistributable. And it looks so old that people just are like, no, that can't be the right thing. But that really is the right thing. So I guess they haven't updated those access drivers since 2010. They're just so solid.
So is this like free to us or
Do what?
it says download for
Well, you can't hear, but on your laptop you need to.
that's kind of what
Yeah, if it's not working on your laptop, this is what you need.
I'm thinking about.
Yep, it's old.
Yeah, if it works, it works.
It's just drivers. Was it pretty quick? I was thinking it was pretty fast.
Yeah, you had to add the dial and drag it in there. For some reason, yeah, mine worked. Ah, I like you. Well, that's frustrating. You like delete it and then re-add it or something.
Okay, are they going? Let's do this. All right, hopefully these guys will have all their stuff installed by the time we're ready to test again.
I got the links before you want to go.
Okay, so let's take a look at our code here. When we're working with a database, I don't know who's that. Who is that? Am I talking to myself? Do I sound crazy? Someone just popped up on my screen and said, I don't have that. I'm at home.
Yeah, that's been there. I don't know how that got to.
I like Greg.
Is it, you think it's Greg? That's what I was wondering. I'm thinking it's Greg. Yep, it's Greg. Okay. Hey, Greg. He's not missing.
Might not be, it didn't work.
It didn't work? You might have to restart.
Yeah, I tried.
We'll,
Tried the whole computer.
you what?
I have to restart.
Yeah, that's what I'm afraid of. Okay, so let's keep going. We will fight and battle through. And if we can't get the access one to work, that's okay because the SQL Server version of it's going to work and it'll just be fine. I just want you to see these different options. Now, whenever we're working with a database, just like we're working with a flat file, we have the possibility of lots of errors that are outside of our program. We could have a connection open to the database and have a network failure and lose our connection. We could have problems establishing our connection. We'd have many, many things happen while we're trying to use the database. So we always want to use try catch. So I'm going to put a try here, and stop it. I didn't put that at first because I just wanted us to try our connection, and you see why, because we have all sorts of problems just from trying our connection. So we know what's going on there. Now with our try, our catch, we're going to catch a system exception, and any system exception, we're going to catch them as an exception object named EXC. If we get an exception, we're going to update our message label and display the message from that exception. So good, now we've got it all saved within our try-catch code. So far we've opened our connection. Now we can set up our SQL statement. We're going to use that SQL string. Remember to hold this SQL statement. In this SQL statement is going to be a select statement, just like the one we generated in Microsoft Access the other day when we were using that query builder. We're going to select everything from our member table. Bless you. We're going to put a space after our table name. Then I do want to add another line, and this line is going to have an order by clause. So we're going to sort by last name, ascending, and then first name ascending. Now at the end of our SQL statement, we're going to put a semicolon, and then we're going to put a semicolon outside of the double quote to close our C# statement. When you're working with a database, this is where the majority of your errors are going to be. These SQL statements are just set up as strings. Nothing's going to interpret them or analyze them for you. If we left out this space here after member table, this word order would be squished right up against the end of that table name, and our query would fail. But we wouldn't get any sort of information back to that effect. All we would know is we didn't get any data. So these strings that we create, that create our SQL code, are really important. We always want to use the debugger, kind of look at them in the debugger. If there's any problems, make sure they're formatted properly, so we don't have a problem. Okay, so there's our SQL statement. Now that we've got our SQL statement in our code, we can create our DB command object. Remember, we named it DBCMD. We're going to say that it's a new OLE DB command object. Now, we could pass that SQL statement in to our constructor, but instead we're going to use the property of the command object. So for our command object, the first property that we need to update is the command text. And we're going to say, you can find that command in my SQL variable. So a couple of things. We didn't really need this SQL variable, right? We could just type all this select statement right here and set that command text equal to it. 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Easier to debug if we have a separate variable, and we might want to use that for more than one thing. Another place is our connection string. Again, we could just have that connection string within that parameter. It would be ugly, but we could. Or up here, where we declare our connection string, we could set it equal to whatever we wanted our connection string to be there as in our class level fields. And honestly, this is probably the most common, because that way when you first open the code, you see that connection string right off the bat. So programmers like to put it up there in their class global variables. All right, so that built, we've got a connection made, and we sort of have a command made, but we need to do one more thing with our command object. We're going to tell this command object what connection to use. And we want it to use our DBCONN connection. So does that mean I could have this one program get data from Access and get data from SQL Server?
Would it matter if you declare the connection type after the command, or like would it ever give you any issues? Or, like,
Your command is dependent upon your connection. Yes. So there's always ways that you can get around things, but doing the basic accessing of the database, they have to be in that order. So we've got our connection established now, or I mean our command, and we've said what connection to use. So the last thing that we have is our reader. Let's get that data. Now, we've already allocated that reader, so we're going to instantiate it. It doesn't like it that way, does it? Our reader is a little bit kind of a weird object. Yes, we don't instantiate it that way. So what we're going to do instead is say, oh, DB reader, you are based on DB commands, and for our DB command object, I want you to run the execute reader method. And in that execute reader method, it will instantiate our reader and load it up with data. So these objects are really closely tied to each other. Now our reader is going to bring back to us our result set from our select statement, which is going to be all the rows from our table. So we need to go into some sort of loop to read all of those rows. So we'll use a while loop, and we'll say while our DB reader can be read, we want to continue executing this loop. So if I can read from my reader, I want to. When we read one line from our reader, it's going to be information about one of our members, their student ID, their last name, their first name, and their phone number. So let's create an instance of a member object for each of these rows. Now our member object, if we use our constructor that required 2 parameters, we need 2 strings. So let's get those strings pulled out of our DB reader. So our DB reader has all this information within it. And to get a specific column from the DB reader, we name the column within square brackets. And our column name has to match exactly. So we are saying, DB reader, I'd like to have access to the first name column, and I would like it to be converted to a string. Then we want to go to our reader and ask for access to our last name column, and we want it to be formatted as a string. Now that's going to build the 2 parameters we need to create our member class instance. So we have that first name and last name. So now that we have that member, let's put that into our list box. And what we want to add is a member. Just about done here. Here's the end of our while. After our while loop is done, let's update our label. Say members loaded or something nice like that. And then we want to close our reader object. And we want to close our connection object.
I got a question.
Mm-hmm.
Why'd you use the this keyword for the list box?
That's just what they have in the textbook, but we don't really need to use it.
Yeah, it doesn't, it looks optional. Yeah, it's optional.
It's optional. They just like throwing it in there every once in a while.
That book is not very consistent programming.
No, I'm sure there were multiple authors. Let's run it. Okay, so hopefully, if everything's working, I can click load data and see all of the rows from my table. Woohoo!
Pretty cool.
It's been amazingly awesome. Now, if we keep clicking our button, it just keeps adding more data. It's not very smart about that. We can make it really, really busy.
Well, if you want to do that, all you have to do is that use the list box.
Yeah, just clear it there.
That's what I did in the exam, because I noticed that. Like,
Where you double it up.
Just kept adding to it. I was like,
Yeah, I just had my like delete everything and go back.
Start over.
Because
It's
that's,
work.
it's running, and that's like part of the rest of it, that's just-
Right there.
That's not too hard to understand. You do- That's why. it takes-
That part, and make sure that your database is named the same too, Robert, because yours might be a little bit different. Now, if you're not being able to get to this one, I want to help get it fixed, but I also want to get us to where we're looking at our SQL Server data. So what does it do if you restart your laptop? Let's see if it's any better.
I just restarted.
If that helps, we'll have everybody do it, but if it doesn't. So let's go to the desktop.
And it's right, you can see the,
Do what?
That's exactly the same.
Uh-huh.
Now it's giving me the same error.
It's the table.
Is it?
Yeah, you copy the table.
Now it's right here.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, because we put that catch in.
Oh,
right.
yeah.
I
So you
installed
download
it
it?
and you gotta
That's why I did a fresh space. That's exactly what it is, because I mean, just put it together. That's what it is.
Oh, it's the 64-bit. Use the 64-bit.
No, I changed it to data. It's
Yes, I'm saying.
Oh.
I'm running 32-bit.
Space.
I just started.
Go to the little link where it says, for more options, click here and choose the 64-bit. But it doesn't matter very much what's offered.
I was able to get that going, type down.
Yeah, we should be-
Before you.
Let's just throw this.
That's fine. No, I don't know why, because they say that drive through is for the 64-bit. So I don't know why you get an error. Yeah, so
I'll try.
Maybe there's a bunch of.
let's go do our SQL Server. Run.
Turns off.
We'll get it to work and then we can figure out these access ones here. Okay, so for SQL Server, what we want to do is like the same exact application, but done it a couple of different ways, and it's kind of difficult for us to copy the application and change everything and have it have any sort of meaning. So what we're going to do instead is close out of this one, and we'll fix any problems that we might have with it later. For now, we're going to close out. And we are going to go find that setup option from Canvas that I said we're going to need later. And here's what we need. Now, this is going to be our SQL Server name. This is called an endpoint address for an Amazon web server, so it's very long and ugly. So that's one we're going to have to put in our code and to connect to the SQL Management Studio. So I'm going to copy that. All of this that's in bold, including the 1433. So I've got it copied. Now, when we used Access to create our database in the table in our database, we used the interface, the user interface that Access supplies. To use SQL Server, we need to use the user interface that SQL Server supplies. And it's called SQL Server Management Studio. Now, it's really junked up on these computers. So follow along and be careful. You must find the 2017 version. So if you click on the Start menu, make sure you're showing all programs. Scroll all the way down to Microsoft. And we want to expand this Microsoft SQL Server Tools 17. What we're looking for, and I need you to do this, we're looking for Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio 17. And again, like I told Levi, I need everybody to do this today so that we can be sure your login works and all those kinds of things so that we can get problems fixed before. Huh? Uh-huh. It finds the 14.
No, it'll find the 17. Just do
SSMS. Okay, do that.
Okay, so what do you do?
SMSS.
I went at it.
Now, once you've got it up, just pin it to your taskbar so that you don't have to go worry about it anymore.
I'm not able to get out of this room.
Now, in your SQL Management Studio, you're going to paste that endpoint address that we copied into this server name field. Your authentication type needs to be SQL Server authentication. Your login is going to be your OTC login. But your password is going to be just the numbers part without any leading zeros. So if you have 00 as the first two digits of your user number, leave those off, just the numbers. And then I have to remember what I changed my password to this morning, which could be bad.
You can take off all the zeros at front. It's the number without any zeros.
Without any zeros or letters.
For the password.
Okay,
If you did.
using the password's kind of ugly now, so.
No, you get rid of it.
Did you make it SQL Server?
Yeah, it doesn't say it here, so I messed it up too, and then
So we'll do is get rid of this.
I'm not seeing that.
yeah, all the zeros and start with the first actual number. Or the non-zero. Not should do it.
And if you pull in more than one spot, instead of pulling it,
I got it.
Right, I remember doing that. I'm going to be so screwed.
like, how do you have
Yeah, because now we got two.
Yeah, I only have two. We're in trouble.
Yeah.
I'm gonna open a second, like, I'm gonna get a new computer, new instance of it, so that I don't have to think. And clearly the more efficient method than like using your brain.
Now, you guys, whenever you're looking at this one, Dylan,
Yeah.
notice it has CIS151 in that endpoint name.
Yeah.
And it'll keep them both in your drop downs here.
Ooh.
Okay.
So you should be able to switch back and forth without it giving you much trouble. So your username and then your password is the number without any letters or zeros. You could, we shouldn't need to use it very often. We'll just need it. Okay, you guys, Levi had a really good question. Should he install this management studio? He doesn't have the SQL class. Probably not. We're just going to create a couple of tables using it, and then we'll, other than that, you'll just be accessing it through your code. So you probably don't need to install it, but you have all sorts of experts.
When doing it, if we do know how to use the Management Studio, would it be better to like write the SQL statement in it first to make sure it works, or just put it in a littler string in the actual code?
Sure, you can do, yeah,
Just to make
either
sure.
way. And yeah, if you were a developer, you would probably do that, because you'd have all your ducks in a row and make sure that your code was doing everything that you wanted it to. So you probably would. Now we're going to create a table. So stick with me here. Let's do this, because I got to make sure you have the right security.
So you said passwords to be the numbers,
Just the numbers with no leading zeros.
no leading here.
I saw his brain get there. I set it up. I set up your accounts using Excel, and so it took off all the leading zeros, and I didn't even realize. Choking to death here. Okay, we want to find your database. So if you expand this databases list, you should see databases for each of you. And I want you to click on your database to make sure it doesn't give you any sort of access violation, because they had to do all of the security rules kind of by hand. So that's why I want everybody to make sure it's all working. Now, if you can click on your database, that's a good sign. Let's expand it. And you don't really have anything built for you other than your database itself. So we'll just be adding tables to this. So anytime you get any sort of instructions from me that say to add a table or add a database, it means go here and add a table to your database, because it won't let you guys add databases. So sometimes I use those terms interchangeably incorrectly. So make sure that's all we need now. So we want to add a table. So click on tables, and on your tables then right click and choose table. Now, just like Access, we're going to be able to build our table by specifying what we want our columns to be. It's not as pretty of an interface, right? It's a little uglier, but it has the same information. So the first thing that we created, the first column that we created in our table was student ID. So we need that here. Now with our student ID, we saw with the Access that we could use that auto number type data that would automatically increment that student ID for us. But we didn't want to do that. We just made our student ID an integer because we wanted to be able to type in the value. So let's look at our data types for SQL Server. You have a few more options, don't you? Remember I said SQL Server could handle millions of users. So there's a lot more customization available for the data type of all of your different columns. Yeah, because we could have videos and all sorts of stuff. So we want to find int. Now with our student ID, we said this was going to be the unique key for our table. So we do not want to allow nulls. So I'm going to uncheck that. I'd like to make this into the key for the table. So over here at the beginning of this column name, you can right click and set primary key. And now this is the primary key of our table. That should be all that we needed to do for that one. Now we want our last name. And in our last name column, we said that it was a text value and we made it 40. So for SQL Server, let's use this varchar, our variable character size, and make it 40 within the parentheses. That means that SQL Server will allow any number of characters up to 40 in this column, but SQL Server will only store those characters that are meaningful. It's variable, so it won't make every name be 40 characters long if it doesn't need to be. Then we have our first name, and our first name also was varchar 40. And then the last thing was our phone number. Now our phone number we made like 12, so I'll make it varchar 12. Now just like access, down here at the bottom, we have specific property settings that we could change for things that we wanted to change for our individual columns. We don't need to change anything, but notice that all these properties are down here. So we could get real specific with SQL Server about default values, and we could set this up as an identity column where it automatically incremented the value and all those kinds of things. But we don't really need to at this point. So let's save our table. And we're going to name it member table, just like we did in access. And it's mad at me because it's like, you dummy, you already have that. That would be true. I do. So I'll just put a 2 on the end of it. It doesn't matter. I'll use that other one. Now we have our SQL Server data. And we could go type in all that test data again. We're going to have to do that at some point. But let's just go back to our code for now and kind of get this program to make sure that we can all connect to SQL Server. We saw with Access how those connection issues can be a problem. So we want to make sure we don't have any of those issues with the server. And then next time we'll get our data in there. So we can close out of this Management Studio. If your table looks good. And let's open Visual Studio again. Now for Visual Studio, we want to create a new application, new project. We want a forms project, and I want to name it consistently. So we're going to name this one DB SQL member app 102. It's there. All right, I've got an application here. It's making me wonder.
What is that for your name again?
Hi, DB SQL member app 102. Now we need to get that member CS file that we created in our previous application. So if you're on a different computer, you might have to send that to yourself. Use our chat, whatever you want to do. But if you're on the same computer like me, it's easy. So just right click on your project and choose Add Existing Item and go navigate into that other project and find your member.cs file and add it. Now our member CS file, we need to update our, there it is. Do I? We need to update our namespace. So make sure that they're the same. We changed it from DB Access to DB SQL. But we want that namespace to be the same. We shouldn't need to change anything else in our member class. It should all be good. What's it griping at us about that? Oh, members never used. Well, we'll fix that. Let's rename some things. Our form, we're going to rename the form member. For program.cs, let's rename it member app. And we're good. So we could copy that form from our previous application, but it is so messy to change those things in our code that I think it's just going to be easier for us to create it again. So let's go to our form. And on our form properties, again, I want the text to say SQL members. And then let's make it a different color so we can tell if we do have them both open. I'm going to use like moccasin. I'm going to make my 4 color dark red. And then my font, I'm going to do 12 again. And Arial. And I think we're ready to put some stuff on here. On a label up at the top. And it's going to say members. And we want it to be big. So let's make it be like 24 point. Underneath that, we had our list box. So it's going to be LST BX members. And then we had a button underneath that. ETN load. And I'm going to make its text property say load data. And lastly, I want that label down at the bottom for our message. So that will be LBL message. And we'll make it say welcome. Okay, we ready? Let's double click our load data button to add some code. Now, just like before, we need to add a using clause for the appropriate data library, data access library. So using system.data, and then for SQL Server, there are 2 that start with SQL. We want SQL client. Actually, there's 3. We want SQL client for our SQL Server. So different variants might require different libraries. Now that we've got our library set up properly, we can allocate our database class, fields, and objects. So the first one we started with before was OLE DB connection. Now it's going to be SQL connection. They left out the DB. And we want to name it DBCONN, just like we did before. So this will be our connection object. Then we're going to do our command, SQL command. Name it DBCMD. Next, we want our data reader. If you look, you'll see it is SQL data reader. So a little bit of differences with some of these object names, but they're pretty consistent. Now we want that instance of our member class called a member. We want our connection string. And then we want our SQL command. Get all our pieces. Get it? Your namespace doesn't match. Okay, so let's look at our load button because I want everybody to get to try this connection before we run out. So for our SQL Server, we're going to make our connection string be an SQL Server connection string. Where might we find that? Well, on Canvas. So on Canvas, the first time that that endpoint is listed, we're talking about how to connect to SQL Server with SQL Server Management Studio. Next, we're talking about how to connect to it using Visual Studio. So I want these 2 lines of code. That's my complete connection string. And I'm going to paste that into Visual Studio. Now, some things we need to change though. So it's got our complete endpoint address. That looks right. And you guys could change this to your SQL Server endpoint address if you wanted to try connecting to it with your C# code. That would be fine. But what we need to change here is our user information. So both places where it says username, you need to make that your username. And then where your password prompt is, you need to put in your password. And this would be why you guys have just generated passwords for this SQL server, because we don't want your real passwords to be pasted in this code. This is always a problem. So anytime we're connecting to any sort of database instance or secured instance, we don't want passwords in code, right? This is bad. We're doing it because we're just learning, and this is the easiest way to form a connection string. But there are ways within Visual Studio to have Visual Studio hide this information, and there are other ways for us to handle it. Warning, 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 if you're listening, please listen. If you load this code to TFS, then you're putting it on the cloud, but it's an OTC controlled cloud. There's not going to be any hackers or bad people that could potentially see your code. If you load this code to GitHub, all bets are off. And on GitHub, there are agents that are constantly running that are looking for these kinds of parameters in people's code so that they can exploit things. And I don't know exactly what happened, but a few weeks ago, apparently, some OTC code got exploited like that. So we need to be super careful. What does that mean? If you're going to put that in GitHub, you need to use a git ignore or some sort of capability in GitHub to tell it to not put these 2 lines of code into the Git file. And you can do a git ignore real easy. Just have to look it up and see how to do it. But be aware. We don't want this kind of security information being posted. Think about your company. You know, you could work for a company. The little company that I worked for in Carthage, little company, it was not too little, but little Southwest Missouri furniture manufacturer. They're not important, right? We didn't make bombs. We didn't make ammunition. We didn't do anything like that. There were constantly corporations from China and from other countries trying to hack into the systems because they want to know how to make furniture that cheap. Is that weird? But it really is that way. So no matter what kind of company we have to safeguard the company's assets. It's our responsibility. Okay, so let's continue and make sure we can get to this thing. So there's our connection string. Now, next, we need to instantiate that connection object. So I'm going to have dbcon equals new SQL connection, and we want it to use our connection string. Then we're going to have dbcon.open. So again, I don't have this trapped within a try-catch right now because it will cancel if it can't make the connection. So let's try running it. Should be able to load our data and not have any sort of errors or anything. Does everything look okay? Let's put in our try-catch because I just really don't trust it. We want to catch any system exception. And we want it to be something like update our message label. Oh, I didn't name that thing. Named EXE. And send that message to our label. Now I'm going to run it again and really believe it if it doesn't give me any messages. Because I can't imagine that I really got my password right. Looks like it's okay.
When did the crash if the exception was done?
No, it's not the kind of, it depends, but if it can't open a database, that's not necessarily a program exception.
Oh, yeah, I got it.
So we have to make sure we're trying to catch those kinds of things. But yeah, I think it would. So everybody connect okay? No? No?
I was just asking because I was just like, wait,
No, I think it would. But sometimes I just don't trust it. Oh, it's not going to let you guys. What are we doing? You're going to have to do everything on the desktop. Because they won't let you guys get to those Amazon web servers either. Why are you?
oh wow, these assignments are going to be a pain.
Yeah, you guys are going to have to use the desktops.
Yeah.
They're just not going to, didn't even know whether it's good for it. I can send them the names, but I just have a feeling they're going to make
if we're gonna be using an access database, we can use that as sort of SQL.
You can, but we really want you using the SQL database just because it's more enterprise system. Yeah,
You know, our assignment on campus.
No, you could come up with something on how silly that is that you could email me. I would love to email the guy that I've been talking to for a month or so about this. Because let's see, my last email was, I'm sure this is very important to you because I know you would not cause this kind of disruption if it wasn't worth the trouble.
You see, this makes it hard for people who have to work or can't come here.
It's ridiculous. You guys can't. You can't do it that way. So if you can just make a list of what it does to you,
It works.
and send it to me.
It works if you're off OTC network.
So when you're on your phone,
Yeah, it sounds right.
I'll do that.
Oh,
Use,
yeah,
use his hotspot. Right? Can we answer your hotspot?
So,
If you want to test it real quick, go ahead.
so if my laptop is on my home network, it should be fine.
It'll be fine at home. It's just here when you're on the OTC network. So yeah, if you have a hotspot too, it'll be okay. So that's what our problem is. The OTC network. So what Chase was doing in the SQL class was really bad. I was like, how are you using your laptop? And he has PC anywhere running on his machine at home. So he's using the OTC network to remote control his PC at home so he can get to SQL Server. If the network staff knew that, that's so much less or more of a security problem than accessing the Amazon web server. But
So
I'm not going to tell him he's doing
so
that.
You're pretty much saying that we can do all of this at home as long as we use this hotspot.
No, you cannot do it at home. It's only when you're connected to the OTC wireless.
That's what I was.
Yeah, that's when you have trouble. So we'll try to figure that out.
God, this makes me so much harder.
Is it actually prompt on? Is it like giving the prompt like you?
Yeah, whenever I do it, it just breaks it. Yeah, and still has a bunch of errors. I just know the forms. Sometimes it gets bumps.
Yeah, of course.
I just go back and .cs. And everything I can do. If I don't, if I ever does that, it's just
Yeah, you need to.
And you did the yes,
whenever it
it's
tries to
not
do
going
it,
to be copy and paste. That's what you're
full F41.
So
The whole thing.
add,
Just exhausting.
let's do it again.
Delete it.
Yeah, it's
There you go.
doesn't function.
Yeah, it doesn't do anything except not do it.
Word.
What about your access one? Still won't work.
So I'll probably get the different version of access.
But yeah, you guys, that's what I wanted to do today. You're good. Start taking a look at the assignment out there, the
Because I
employee
think we can know it's different.
database. You should have enough information to really start working on that and at least start gathering some questions in your head about it. So take a look.
Batteries.
Instead of OOEDB, that's the
Strange.
and then okay.
This employee one isn't much different from what we just said. Is it?
No, it's not much different at all. Very, very similar, so you should be okay.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
That's what I do is like, I'm just literally just letting it out. That's- My problem
Yup.
is, I'm driving, like I don't have my own vehicle.
Uh-huh.
Here is very difficult because some days I have to work until like 9 o'clock at night.
Uh-huh.
So that's kind of why I was like that whole clear. I can do it right now.
Oh, I understand.
And I
It's,
can't
it's
do it
important.
because my ride, I don't go home when I ride.
Mhm.
They'll pick me up till like 10 o'clock.
I don't want you to do that.
Hopefully, we can get this one out, or we can get this one to finish next week.
Well, you'll have to find some sort of hotspot or something. You're either going to have to probably share theirs, unless you guys give me some sort of letter that I can send on. But I'm not going to argue with them for you guys. I need to hear it from you. Well, then I've got to see it. So